Juan Manuel Marquez was one of boxing's most skilled and fearless warriors. A four-division world champion, a master counterpuncher, and a Mexican legend, he etched his name in history with unforgettable battles. His rivalry with Manny Pacquiao defined his career, culminating in a devastating one-punch knockout in 2012, a moment that cemented his greatness. But time has not been kind to him. Now, at 51 years old, Marquez's life is far from the glory he once knew. His body, once built for war, is breaking down. Failed business ventures, financial struggles, and personal setbacks have cast a shadow over his once proud legacy. The man who stood tall in the ring now fights a different kind of battle, one against time, pain, and the harsh reality of life after boxing. This is the story of Juan Manuel Marquez, the champion, the rival, and the tragic truth of where he is today. Juan Manuel Marquez was born on August 23, 1973, in Mexico City, into a hard-working, working-class family. Life in the capital was tough, and for many young boys, the path to a better future often ran through the boxing ring. For Marquez, boxing wasn't just a sport, it was a way out. His father, a disciplined and strict man, introduced him to the sport at just 8 years old, believing it could teach him discipline and resilience. Marquez was a natural. Unlike the typical aggressive, come-forward Mexican fighters, he developed a counter-punching style early on. Inspired by Mexican legends like Julio Cesar Chavez and Ricardo Lopez, he focused on precision, footwork, and defensive mastery. He wasn't the kind of fighter who simply overwhelmed opponents with pressure. He made them pay for their mistakes. His ability to take a shot and immediately respond with an even sharper counter made him one of the most technically gifted fighters Mexico had ever produced. As an amateur, Marquez's skills were undeniable. He compiled a remarkable record of 82 wins and only 6 losses, proving himself as one of the most promising young fighters in Mexico. Many expected him to pursue an Olympic career, but like many Mexican fighters before him, he opted to turn professional at just 19 years old. It was a bold decision, but Marquez believed that his style was better suited for the pro ranks, where he could develop his patient, methodical approach. However, his pro debut did not go as planned. In 1993, Marquez faced Javier Duran in his first professional bout, and in a shocking turn of events, he lost due to a controversial disqualification. The loss was a brutal way to begin his career, but instead of dwelling on it, Marquez used it as motivation. It would be more than 7 years before he lost another fight. Following that setback, Marquez went on a spectacular winning streak, systematically dismantling opponents with his technical brilliance. Unlike flashy knockout artists, he wasn't looking for one-punch finishes. He was a strategist, breaking opponents down round by round. His fights were often described as masterclasses in patience and precision, with Marquez always seeming one step ahead of his rival. Despite his undeniable talent early in his career, Marquez struggled to get major opportunity. He lacked the explosive, fan-friendly style that promoters favored, and his quiet, business-like demeanor didn't generate the kind of buzz that made other Mexican fighters household names. While his brother, Rafael Marquez, was gaining recognition as a world-class bantamweight, Juan Manuel had to fight his way through the rankings the hard way. By the late 1990s, Marquez had built an impressive resume, but was still being overlooked for world title shots. His patience and discipline, however, never wavered. He continued refining his craft, waiting for the moment when the world would be forced to take notice. He trained relentlessly, sparring with some of the best fighters in Mexico, always believing that his time would come. His breakthrough finally arrived in 2003 when he faced Manuel Medina for the IBF featherweight title. It was the opportunity he had been waiting for, and he did not waste it. Marquez put on a brilliant performance, stopping Medina in the 7th round and finally claiming his first world championship. At 30 years old, he had finally achieved his dream of becoming a world champion, but this was just the beginning. His intelligence, counter-punching ability, and relentless work ethic had carried him to the top, and he was determined to stay there. The boxing world would soon realize that Juan Manuel Marquez was far more than just a champion. He was a legend in the making. Winning his first world title in 2003 was a defining moment for Juan Manuel Marquez, but it was just the beginning. He wasn't content with being just another champion. He wanted to be one of the greatest. However, despite his skill and technical mastery, he still struggled to get the recognition he deserved. Then came the fight that changed everything. In 2004, Marquez Marquez defended his IBF featherweight title against Manny Pacquiao, a fast-rising Filipino superstar with devastating speed and power. Pacquiao had already become a fan favorite due to his relentless aggression and knockout ability. Many viewed Marquez as just another obstacle in Pacquiao's rise. What followed was one of the most dramatic fights in boxing history. The fight started like a nightmare for Marquez. In the very first round, Pacquiao dropped him 3 times, using his blistering left hand to send Marquez crashing to the canvas over and over. The fight looked all but over. Most fighters wouldn't have survived, but Marquez was not like most fighters. Instead of succumbing to the onslaught, he did what he did best. He adapted. He got up, cleared his head, and adjusted his strategy. From the second round onward, Marquez began outboxing Pacquiao, neutralizing his aggression with sharp counters. He made Pacquiao miss, punished him with precision right hands, and turned the fight around in stunning fashion. By the end of 12 grueling rounds, many believed Marquez had done enough to win. Then came the controversy. The judges ruled the fight a split draw, with one judge admitting later that a scoring error had cost Marquez the victory. It was a heartbreaking moment. He had survived hell, adjusted, and outboxed one of the most dangerous fighters in the world. Yet, he was denied victory. That fight sparked one of the greatest rivalries in boxing history. Over the next 8 years, Marquez and Pacquiao would face each other 3 more times, with every fight ending in controversy. In 2008, they fought again in a close battle. Pacquiao won by a razor-thin split decision, but many believed Marquez had won. In 2011, they met for a 3rd time. Marquez once again put on a brilliant counterpunching display, seemingly doing enough to secure victory, but the judges gave Pacquiao a majority decision win. Marquez was furious. Marquez felt robbed, and the frustration only fueled his determination. He demanded a 4th fight, refusing to let the rivalry end without a definitive answer. On December 8, 2012, the 2 warriors met for the 4th and final time. This time, Marquez was not leaving anything to chance. In the 6th round, with Pacquiao pressing forward aggressively, Marquez unleashed the greatest punch of his career, a perfectly timed overhand right that landed flush on Pacquiao's chin. The Filipino legend collapsed face first onto the canvas, unconscious before he even hit the ground. The arena exploded. It was one of the most devastating knockouts in boxing history. After years of controversy, after so many close calls, Marquez had finally defeated his greatest rival in the most definitive way possible. There was no debate, no questionable scoring, just a single thunderous punch that ended the war once and for all. That moment cemented Marquez's legacy. He had proven himself to be one of the greatest Mexican fighters.
Can you please just hear me out? No, all work management platforms are the same. They take forever to learn, and in the end, nobody uses them. Monday.com is the one you'll actually love to use.
Of all time. The once overlooked counterpuncher had become a legend. Juan Manuel Marquez walked away from boxing in 2017, closing the book on one of the most legendary careers in the sport's history. He had accomplished everything a fighter could dream of: world titles in 4 weight classes, victories over Hall of Famers, and an unforgettable rivalry with Manny Pacquiao that ended with one of the greatest knockouts of all time. He had achieved glory, secured his place among Mexico's all-time greats, and left the sport with his head held high. But as so many fighters before him had learned, retirement from the ring is often the beginning of a different kind of fight, one against time, financial instability, and the struggle to find purpose beyond the sport. At first, Marquez seemed to be adjusting well to post-boxing life. Unlike many fighters who returned to the ring well past their prime, he resisted the temptation of a comeback, instead focusing on business ventures, commentary work, and spending time with his family. He had always been known as an intelligent, disciplined fighter, and many assumed he would transition smoothly into life after boxing. But as the years passed, the challenges of retirement began to take their toll. Although Marquez officially announced his retirement in 2017, he had already been struggling with the decision for years. In 2014, he began experiencing severe knee and back issues, the result of years of brutal wars inside the ring. Despite Despite undergoing multiple surgeries and intense rehabilitation, his body never fully recovered. In 2016, rumors of a comeback surfaced, with Marquez expressing interest in a final fight to give his career a proper farewell. There was even talk of a potential matchup with Miguel Cotto, a dream fight that would have been a massive event. But training for a return proved too much for his aging body. His knees couldn't handle the strain, and after several setbacks, he was forced to abandon the idea. Even after officially retiring, Marquez still struggled with the idea of never fighting again. Fighters often describe the transition to normal life as the hardest battle of all. For years, he had followed a strict regimen, waking up early, training, pushing his body to its limits. Without boxing, that structure disappeared. Throughout his career, Marquez earned millions of dollars, particularly from his fights with Manny Pacquiao. But as many retired boxers have learned, wealth doesn't last without careful management. Marquez was not a reckless spender like some fighters, but he made several poor investments that did not pay off. After retiring, he attempted to launch a boxing promotions company, hoping to use his experience to guide the next generation of fighters. However, the business struggled financially, failing to secure the kind of major backing needed to compete with established promoters like Top Rank and Golden Boy Promotions. On top of that, Marquez invested in several other business ventures, including real estate deals and smaller promotions, but many of them failed to generate sustainable income. A combination of bad partnerships, mismanagement, and market downturns resulted in financial losses that left Marquez in a far less stable position than expected for a fighter of his stature. By the time he was in his early 50s, his financial situation was uncertain. While not completely broke, Marquez was far from the wealthy, comfortable retiree that many assumed he would be. Marquez had always been known for his incredible durability inside the ring, but the years of absorbing punishment left permanent damage on his body. Fighters often talk about how the pain doesn't truly begin until after retirement, and for Marquez, this was painfully true. His knees had been a problem for years, requiring multiple surgeries, and by his 50s, walking without discomfort became a daily struggle. He also dealt with severe back issues, a common problem for aging fighters who spent years twisting and absorbing blows in the ring. Beyond the visible injuries, there were also concerns about neurological damage. While Marquez was never known for taking excessive punishment, his wars with Pacquiao, Juan Diaz, and Marco Antonio Barrera were brutal battles that took a toll. Fighters from his era, including Eric Morales and Marco Antonio Barrera, had openly spoken about the long-term effects of their careers. While Marquez has not publicly admitted to cognitive decline, rumors persist that he has shown early signs of memory lapses and slurred speech in private conversations. For many retired fighters, commentary and analysis work provide a way to stay connected to the sport. Marquez initially embraced this path, working as a commentator for Mexican sports networks and occasionally appearing on major boxing broadcasts. However, his outspoken nature and willingness to criticize promoters and fighters led to tension within the boxing industry. He was particularly vocal about his disdain for Top Rank and Bob Arum, the promotional company that handled much of his career. He accused them of favoritism and blamed them for the controversial decisions in his fights against Pacquiao. Over time, his outspoken views led to fewer opportunities in boxing media as major networks hesitated to work with him due to his strained relationships with powerful figures in the industry. In addition to his media struggles, Marquez never fully embraced the role of a trainer or mentor. Unlike legends such as Nacho Beristain, who took young fighters under their wing, Marquez preferred to remain on the sidelines. While he occasionally trained fighters on a short-term basis, he never committed to full-time coaching. This further isolated him from the sport he once dominated. By the time Marquez turned 51, the reality of his post-boxing life was clear. His body was breaking down, his finances were unstable, and his connection to the boxing world was fading. While he still made occasional media appearances, he was no longer the revered figure he once was. Unlike other retired champions who remained active as trainers, promoters, or commentators, Marquez found himself drifting further away from the sport that had defined his life. His once chiseled physique had softened, and he walked with the stiffness of a man who had spent decades fighting wars in the ring. The pride and confidence that had once defined him were still there, but the spark had dimmed. For years, he had dedicated everything to boxing, sacrificing his health and personal personal life to become one of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time. But now, in retirement, he was left to face the consequences of a career spent in battle. His legacy remains undeniable. He will always be remembered for his technical brilliance, his warrior's heart, and his unforgettable knockout of Pacquiao. But outside the ring, his life tells a familiar story, one of struggle, of loss, and of the painful reality that even the greatest champions cannot fight time itself. For years, Juan Manuel Marquez was one of Mexico's most celebrated boxing icons. But as time passed, his personal and professional life began to unravel. The fighter who once stood atop the boxing world found himself increasingly isolated, dealing with financial troubles, deteriorating health, and growing tensions within his own family. Retirement had brought challenges he never could have prepared for, and soon he would find himself drifting further away from the sport that had defined his life. Marquez had always been known as a disciplined, dedicated fighter, but that same singular focus on boxing often came at the cost of his personal life. Like many fighters, he spent years traveling, training, and preparing for battle, leaving little time for his family. The consequences of that sacrifice became more evident in retirement. Reports began to surface that his longtime marriage was under serious strain. While Marquez was never the type to air personal issues in public, sources close to him suggested that financial instability and post-boxing struggles had created tension within his household. The transition from a wealthy, active world champion to an aging retired fighter with uncertain financial security placed a massive strain on his family life. At his peak, Marquez had enjoyed millions in earnings, endorsements, and high-profile sponsorships, allowing him to provide a luxurious lifestyle for his family. But as his investments failed and his financial situation became less stable, the pressure grew. Arguments over money, future plans, and the uncertain direction of his post-boxing career reportedly caused major rifts in his marriage. While he remained dedicated to his children, sources claim that Marquez was not always present during key moments of their lives, as he struggled with his own post-career identity. Unlike fighters who smoothly transitioned into training or commentary, Marquez became increasingly detached, unsure of where he truly fit in a world that no longer revolved around him. Marquez had never been one to hold back his opinion, but as time went on, his outspoken nature created more problems than opportunity. He had long been critical of major boxing promoters, particularly Bob Arum and Top Rank, whom he blamed for the controversial decisions in his fights against Manny Pacquiao. His public criticism of the boxing establishment led to strained relationships with network executives, promoters, and media outlets, making it harder for him to stay involved in the sport as a commentator or analyst. Unlike other retired Mexican legends such as Julio Cesar Chavez, who remained active as broadcasters and trainers, Marquez found himself increasingly pushed out of the boxing spotlight. At first, he did secure commentary jobs with Mexican sports networks, but his refusal to filter his opinions led to conflicts with producers and executives. He openly criticized fighters, promoters, and matchmakers, often expressing his frustration over what he saw as corruption in the sport. Over time, his television appearances became less frequent, and younger analysts and former fighters took over the roles he once occupied. His inability to adapt to the changing media landscape, coupled with his lack of major business success, left him struggling to find a steady income stream in retirement. Marquez's outspoken nature also alienated him from potential business ventures. While other retired fighters successfully launched brands, training gyms, and sponsorship deals, Marquez's lack of industry allies and reluctance to engage in self-promotion left him without many opportunities. Unlike Canelo Alvarez, who built a massive personal brand, or Eric Morales and Marco Antonio Barrera, who remained actively involved in boxing promotions, Marquez gradually faded from relevance. He was still respected as a legend, but without a strong business network or active role in the sport, his influence slowly diminished. By the time he reached his early 50s, Marquez's isolation had become apparent. He was no longer a regular presence at major boxing events. While many retired champions continued to attend fights, train younger fighters, or work as analysts, Marquez had distanced himself from the industry. He occasionally gave interviews, but his tone had changed. The once fiery warrior who had fought for every inch of respect now spoke with a sense of frustration and regret. He had once been on top of the world, knocking out legends divisions and winning world titles, but now he was struggling to maintain his place in a sport that had moved on without him. His physical condition continued to decline, with his lingering knee and back issues making even everyday activities difficult. Some fans who encountered him at public events noted that he no longer carried the same confident presence. Instead, he looked tired, worn out, and far removed from his prime. Marquez's story is one of incredible triumph, but also of the harsh realities of life after boxing. He gave everything he had to the sport, but in return, he was left battling financial uncertainty, physical pain, and a sense of detachment from the world he once ruled. The once proud counterpuncher, who had outlasted and outsmarted some of the greatest fighters of his generation, was now facing the toughest opponent of all, life after the ring. With no clear path forward, Marquez's future remained uncertain.